October 19, 2014, from Ralph Wilson Stadium in Buffalo, New York. It was the Minnesota Vikings at the Buffalo Bills. And the Vikings won the toss and they elected to receive. They would end up punting on their first possession. So the Bills would take over with about 12 minutes left in the first. They started off on their own 35. They ended up making it into field goal range, but on 3rd and 11 from the Minnesota 25, Kyle Orton dropped back to pass, and he hit Hogan, but then he fumbled, and the Vikings took over on their own 12-yard line with about 9 minutes left in the first. They were backed up then on the first play with a penalty, so it was 1st and 15 from their own 7. But then they ended up picking up a first down, and they would get the ball towards midfield, and then it was 1st and 7 from their own 47. But then Bridgewater was sacked by Marcel Darius for a 10-yard loss, and they would end up punting 3 plays later. So now the Bills took over on their own 4-yard line, backed up against their own end zone. They did pick up a first down, but then on 2nd and 6 from their own 19, Orton hit Woods and another fumble. So now Minnesota recovered on a fumble for the second straight possession, and now they had the ball in Buffalo territory on the Buffalo 27. They wouldn't get anywhere, and 4 plays later, Blair Walsh would come out to kick a 40-yard field goal, and it was good, and the Vikings took the lead with the first points on the scoreboard, with it now 3-0 Minnesota over Buffalo. Buffalo would now get the ball with less than 2 minutes left in the first, and they'd go 3 and out and punt the ball back to the Vikings. The Vikings then brought the first quarter to a close, and they would open up the second with the score still 3-0, and they had the ball on the Minnesota 45 after having picked up 5 yards on a defensive holding penalty on the last play of the first quarter. They would end up getting down into towards near field goal range. It was 3rd and 7 on the Buffalo 38. Bridgewater dropped back to pass, and he was intercepted by McKinnon. And so now Buffalo would take over on their own 29. They would reach midfield and just to the edge of Minnesota territory, but on 4th and 11 from the Minnesota 48, they punted the ball. The Vikings only had it for 1 play on their next drive as they started off 1st and 10 from their own 12-yard line, and Bridgewater threw another interception to McKinnon. So now Buffalo took over on the Minnesota 26. Kyle Orton dropped back to pass, and he found Sammy Watkins for the 26-yard touchdown, and it was now 7-3 with about 9.5 minutes left in the first half as the Bills took the 4-point lead. So now Minnesota got the ball with about 9 minutes and about a little less than a half, and they had it on their own 40 after a penalty on the kick return, and it was an illegal formation. And so then they ended up bringing the ball across midfield on 3rd and 7 from their own 43. Teddy Bridgewater found Greg Jennings for a 38-yard pass that brought it all the way to the red zone. So it was now 1st down on the Buffalo 19. Bridgewater then hit Jennings for a second consecutive pass, this one for 15 yards, to make it 1st and goal from the Buffalo 4. Bridgewater then hit Cordarrelle Patterson for the 4-yard touchdown pass off the screen, and the Vikings now took back the lead with the score 10-7, Minnesota over Buffalo. So now the Bills had the ball on their own 20-yard line with about 6 minutes left in the second quarter. And Kyle Orton hit Watkins for a 12-yard pass. And then C.J. Spiller on 1st down from the 32 ran for 53 yards, but he was injured on the play, but not after bringing the ball down to the Minnesota 15. Dixon then ran for 4, and Orton threw an incomplete pass that brought up 3rd and 6, and Kyle Orton was sacked by Griffin for a 3-yard loss, and that made it 4th and 9 from the 14, and Dan Carpenter came out to kick a 31-yard field goal, and this game was now tied at 10 apiece. So now the Vikings took over with about 4 minutes left before halftime. They would go 3 and out, so they punted the ball back to Buffalo, and Buffalo had the ball on their own 15. They did bring the ball close to midfield, but then on 2nd and 10 from their own 40, Kyle Orton dropped back to pass and was intercepted by Blanton. And so now the Vikings got the ball on their own 41 with a little over a minute left before halftime. They crossed into Buffalo territory. But then on 3rd and 7 from the 42, Teddy Bridgewater hit Patterson, and they only gained 5 yards. So now it's 4th and 2 from the 37. Blair Walsh came out to kick a 55-yard field goal, and it was good. And the Vikings took the lead 13-10 just before halftime. Orton took a knee, and this game went to the locker rooms. And at intermission, Minnesota had the slight lead, 13-10 over Buffalo. And in the first half, in the second half, to start things off in the third quarter, Buffalo would get the ball, but they went 3 and out. Minnesota would end up punting on their first possession of the second half after having picked up a first down. So they ended up punting. And then Buffalo got the ball on their own 40, and they moved it across midfield, and they got all the way down to the red zone. But then on 1st and 10 from the Minnesota 17, Kyle Orton ended up fumbling the ball on a sack as Griffin sacked him. Barr recovered, and so now Minnesota had the ball on their own 18-yard line. They picked up a first down, but then they ended up having to punt 4 plays later. So now Buffalo got the ball back. They were on their own 13-yard line, and they would go 3 and out. So now Minnesota had the ball with about 2.5 minutes left in the third, and they had it right at midfield on their own 49. But then a few plays later, it was 2nd and 16 from the Buffalo 47, and that would bring the quarter to an end after a 2-yard loss by McKinnon. So now, after 3 quarters of play, the Vikings were up by 3 points with the score 13-10. So in the beginning of the fourth quarter, it was now 3rd and 18 from the Buffalo 49, and somehow, someway, Teddy Bridgewater found right for a 28-yard pass. The catch was challenged, but it was ruled a catch, and so the Vikings had a first down on the Buffalo 21. They were right on the edge of the red zone, and on 3rd and 10 from the 21, Bridgewater hit right again, this time for a 14-yard pass, and that made it 1st and goal from the 7. But on 1st down, Bridgewater was sacked by Hughes, and then on 2nd down, Bridgewater was sacked by Marcel Darius. So now it was 3rd and goal from the 23. They picked up 8 with a run by McKinnon to set up a 33-yard field goal by Walsh, and it was up and it was good. And now the Vikings had a 6-point lead with the score 16-10 with about 12 minutes left in the game. So now Buffalo took over on their own 20. They moved the ball out to midfield, but they would end up having to punt after Kyle Orton was sacked on 3rd down from the 44, as Floyd and Griffin combined to sack him. And so now on 4th and 18 from the 48, their own 48, they ended up punting the ball. So now Minnesota had the ball with less than 7 minutes left in this game. They had it on their own 22. They moved the ball up to midfield. Their drive stalled, and they would end up having to punt the ball from the Buffalo 48 on 4th and 7. So now Buffalo took over with about 3 minutes left in this game. They had it on their own 20. Kyle Orton hit Woods for a 4-yard pass to bring it to the 24. Orton then hit Chandler for a 7-yard pass. Now it was 1st and 10 from the Buffalo 31. An incomplete pass brought up 2nd and 10. Orton then hit Watkins for a 19-yard pass to bring the ball to midfield as it was 1st down on the 50. Kyle Orton was then sacked by Joseph for a 7-yard loss, and it was now 2nd and 17 from the Buffalo 43. Orton was then sacked again. Well, actually, an incomplete pass on 2nd and 17, then brought up 3rd and 17, and Orton was sacked by Johnson for a 3-yard loss. So now it was 4th down and 20 from the Buffalo 40, and Kyle Orton dropped back to pass, and he found Scott Chandler for a 24-yard reception that brought the ball to the Minnesota 36. Buffalo then called a timeout, and then a penalty against Buffalo, a false start, made it 1st and 15 from the Minnesota 41. Then an incomplete pass made it 2nd and 15. Kyle Orton then dropped back to pass, and he got Hogan for a 3-yard reception. So it's now 3rd and 12 from the Minnesota 38. Orton dropped back to pass, and he found Sammy Watkins for an 18-yard reception. That would pick up the 1st down and make it 1st and 10 on the Minnesota 20 as Minnesota burned their final timeout. An incomplete pass, then a penalty of intentional grounding on that incompletion pushed them back to the 30, so it was now 2nd and 20 from the Minnesota 30. Orton then dropped back to pass, and he found Hogan for a 28-yard reception. They then rushed up to the line with 5 seconds left on the clock. Orton spiked the ball, and so now it would end up being 2nd and goal from the Minnesota 2-yard line. Minnesota called a timeout to try to regroup, and then as play returned, Kyle Orton hit Sammy Watkins for a 2-yard touchdown, and the Buffalo Bills take the 1-point lead with just a second on the clock. And then after the kickoff ended in just a bunch of laterals, the game expired, and the Buffalo Bills pull off the victory in amazing, exciting fashion. Just when it looked like all hope was lost, somehow, some way, Kyle Orton is able to hit the right receivers at the right time, and the Buffalo Bills win this one by 1 point in quite the exciting game. And the Buffalo Bills are now 4-3 on the season. The Vikings are now 2-5. In this game, Kyle Orton was 31 for 43 with 283 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Teddy Bridgewater was 15 for 26 with 157 passing yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. McKinnon was the game's leading rusher with 103 yards off of 19 carries. Spiller had 53 yards off of that 1 carry where he was sadly injured. Dixon had 51 yards off of 13 carries. The leading receiver was Sammy Watkins. He caught that game-winning touchdown. He had 122 yards off of 9 receptions and 2 touchdowns on the game. And for the defense of Buffalo, they came up huge. They had 5 sacks. Hughes had 1.5. Searcy had a half sack. Marcel Darius had 2 sacks. And Super Mario had 1 sack. The Vikings were sack busy as well. They had 6 sacks. Griffin had 3 sacks himself. Floyd had 1. Johnson had 1. And Joseph had 1. And both teams had interceptions. Blanton had 1 for the Vikings, and McClevin had 2 clutch interceptions for Buffalo. So this game was all about defense, and the Bills come through with a late drive. And the final score, Buffalo 17, Minnesota 16.